Hello creators and creative friends, welcome back to the channel. Recently, the Krea team released its latest text-to-image model, Krea 2. Krea 2 comes in two versions. One is Krea 2 Raw, which is similar to Z-Image Base. The other is Krea 2 Turbo, which is similar to Z-Image Turbo. I wanted to see which one was actually better, so I generated hundreds of images to compare Krea 2 Turbo and Z-Image Turbo side by side. After looking all of them, I found that Krea 2 has more potential. It can handle more visual styles, it follows prompts more accurately, it also makes fewer mistakes with human bodies and hands. On top of that, it produces fewer artifacts in small details. Now let's go to Running Hub and take a look at the comparison workflow I built. For those who are not familiar with it, Running Hub is an online ComfyUI platform. I also compared it with RunPod in another video. You can find the link to that video in the description below. Let's talk about the setup for our comparison. For the Z-Image Turbo diffusion model, I used the BF16 version. The file size is 12.3 GB. For Krea 2 Turbo, I used the FP8 version. The file size is 13.1 GB. So the two models are almost the same size. That makes this a fairly balanced comparison. For the text encoder of Z-Image Turbo, I used this one instead of the QN34B version recommended by ComfyUI. As I mentioned in my previous video, this text encoder can produce better image quality. The settings are the same for both models. Both use the Euler sampler and the simple scheduler. The sampling steps are set to 8. I only used these specific samplers and schedulers because they are the default factory settings. This keeps the text completely even, but when you generate images yourself, I do not recommend using these settings directly. They are just for testing purposes. For this image, Z-Image Turbo took 34 seconds to generate. Krea 2 Turbo took 33 seconds, so both models are very fast. Now let's look at some of the actual images I generated. The first comparison is designed to test anatomy. I labeled the images in the upper left corner. The image on the left was generated by Z-Image Turbo. The image on the right was generated by Krea 2 Turbo. For this test, I used a very specific pose description in the prompt. I asked for a male dancer standing in a deep lunge. I specified that one foot should be planted forward and the other one extended behind him. I also asked for both of his arms to be wrapped securely around the female dancer's waist. Take a close look at the results. As you can see, the image generated by Z-Image Turbo has some body errors. The woman has 3 legs. Also, the water bottles in the background are missing, even though I included them in the prompt. Now let's look at another comparison. For this next set of images, I wanted to test another complex pose. The description asks for a woman standing on a narrow rock foothold. She needs to stretch one hand down to formally grasp a man's outstretched wrist. The man is supposed to lean forward with one foot pressing against the rock wall. His other hand should be passing a chalk bag up to the woman. Neither image gets the pose perfectly right, but the image generated by Krea 2 is closer to the prompt. Once again, Z-Image Turbo gives the woman 3 legs. These two tests tell us a lot. We can clearly see that Krea 2 is much better at handling human anatomy. It also pays closer attention to the details in a prompt. Let's move on to the next test. Here we have two mechanical keyboards. In the image generated by Krea 2, we can clearly see the internal switch stamps showing through the clear keycaps. It looks very realistic. Now look at the Z-image result. The internal parts seem to poke through to the outside of the keys. They turn into strange, unrecognizable artifacts. Also, the colorful lighting on the Z-Image keyboard is a bit dull. It's just not as bright and vivid as the lighting from Krea 2. Next up, let's examine these two close-up shots of classical guitars. We all know that a standard guitar has 6 strings. Try looking very closely at the strings generated by Z-Image. You can see that one of the strings gets thinner and thinner as it gets closer to the sound hole. Eventually, it just disappears completely into nothing. But if you look at the strings generated by Krea 2, they stay perfectly solid and intact the whole way down. Now let's check out these two fancy Moroccan courtyards. This kind of thing usually features strong left-right symmetry. Let's zoom in a little bit to see the details. Look at the tile mosaics generated by Z-Image. The shapes are very odd and the patterns look broken up. On the other hand, the tiles generated by Krea 2 look so much better and more structured. So from these 3 examples, we can see that Krea handles complex structures better than Z-Image. Now let's talk about styles. First, let's look at this portrait of a skater boy. The prompt is very simple. Skater boy, concrete park, action shot, youthfulness, Vivian Maier style. Vivian Maier was an American street photographer born in 1926. She was best known for black and white candid street photography. Her photos often captured everyday life in the city. I think Krea 2 understands her style better. First, the image is black and white. It also created a nice layered composition that looks like a real street scene. You can see the skateboarder along with people sitting in the background. The image focuses on natural shadows and everyday public life. The Z image result, however, just looks like a polished, modern photo shoot. Let's look at one more style test, this time in the style of Cindy Sherman. She became a very famous artist in the United States during the late 1970s and 1980s. She is known for constructing unique characters in her work. She does this by using very carefully staged photos instead of natural candid shots. I think the image on the right from Krea 2 fits her artistic logic much better. In this image, the woman is wearing a floral vintage dress with a Peter Pan collar. This outfit perfectly creates the feeling of a classical domestic character. The kitchen in the background also feels very intentional. It looks like a carefully constructed set rather than a real lived-in kitchen space. Alright, we have seen quite a few comparisons now. You might be ready to conclude that Krea 2 is simply always better than the image. But that is not always true. Let's look at these two portraits of fishermen. It looks like the skin texture generated by Krea 2 is a lot smoother than the skin from the image. We can see something similar if we look at these two images of chocolate chip cookies. Compare the cookies generated by both models. The ones from Krea 2 are just a bit too smooth. They are missing those irregular creases and natural cracks that make cookies look real. The image did a better job with that texture. So does this mean Krea 2 is bad at generating fine textures? Not exactly. You have to remember that I'm only using the basic ComfyUI workflow for generating these images right now. If we start tweaking things, the result will change. For example, we could try using different samplers and schedulers. We could load a different way or even add a custom realism LoRa model. Doing any of those things would give us much better texture details. I'm going to dive much deeper into Krea 2 and its advanced settings in a future video, so please stay tuned for that.